Hi, this is Claudia Filos. I'm with the Center for Hellenic Studies in Washington, D.C. I'm joining remotely, and today we're hosting office hours with Professor Gregory, Professor Leonard Muellner, and Allie Marbry, who's Programs Manager at Center for Hellenic Studies. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Good to be here.
It's wonderful to be here.
Thanks. So, I was hoping if we could just start off very quickly with one of the most important questions that's coming up in our discussion board, which is the question, am I too late to join? Am I too late to join the project, Module 1?
May I try an answer to this, which is that if you're a hero, you are too late, because all heroes are late. They're late all the time, and they only catch up when they die. For us ordinary mortals, however, I'm happy to report it's never too late. And especially in this course, although we're reading a lot of things, and in some situations we have to read fast because otherwise we get discouraged, and we want to make sure that we get through. It's also one of those things where every time we keep on reading, the Iliad, to start with that medium, keeps hitting you over the head again and again and again about what are the important things. So if you miss it first time, second time, fifth time, 17th time, you'll still be okay, because if you just keep reading, you'll get it. And the most demonically motivated people sometimes get discouraged. And that's why I think it's so important to switch to fast reading when you get discouraged. And just push ahead until you see something that really engages you. And if you say, oh, but I'm nowhere on the Iliad, and there are people who are 17 rhapsodies ahead of me, it doesn't matter, because we're not testing you on facts. We're not testing you even on your complete control of the plot. In fact, we're not testing you. You're testing yourself, and you're practicing how to communicate in a thoughtful way, in a thinking way, about the world's greatest literature. And I like to tell people that Herodotus, the so-called father of history, said, and here he is talking in the late 5th century BCE, that if you know Homeric poetry and Hesiodic poetry, you're civilized, you're educated.
Right.
And I love to say that to people when they say, oh, I just don't know any of the background. Could you recommend some books so I can catch up on Greek history or Greek prehistory, or I can't control all the names of these gods and heroes. And I say to them, if you want background, just read the Iliad, and then read the Iliad, and then read the Iliad. And I'm not being cavalier about it, because it's not easy. It is discouraging. Lenny and I, who have been doing this all our lives, can still get very easily discouraged. That's also why it's so important to be members of a community where we can encourage each other. So I'm talking too much about it being too late, but for people out there who are trying to read the Iliad, it's not too late. And if you haven't read any of the Iliad and we're soon reading the Odyssey, it's not too late either, because you can start with the Odyssey and then work your way backwards to the Iliad.
Right. I started with the Odyssey.
So Allie started with the Odyssey, and look where she is.
But you also started reading the end of the Odyssey.
Oh, can I tell that story?
Sure.
Yes, please. Yes.
When I was a first-year graduate student, and I started at Harvard University, I had very little in the classical works. I had read things like marriage contracts on papyri. I had read Greek erotic novels in the original, but when my graduate advisor, called Eric Catalogue, said, well, how much Homer have you had? None. How about tragedy? None. How about Plato? None. And so they put me into a remedial Homer reading course, enough to get a very, very good teacher, John Finley, who said, well, where should we start? And so he suggested Odyssey, Rhapsody 24, the very last unit of the Odyssey, where in the first 200 plus lines, you have a beautiful retrospective on not just the Odyssey, but the Iliad.
Yeah.
And So I read those first 200 lines and I thought, where has this been all my life?
How beautiful.
Yeah.
And so, Lenny, you also, when you first started reading Greek Homer, you read a book of the Odyssey too, right? Am I right about that?
The first Homer I read was the sixth book of the Odyssey, when
Wow.
Odysseus is asleep for the first time. He wakes up on the island of Filos.
Wow.
So we have a lot of beautiful Odyssey things to look forward to, right? In our next module, and so I know the community will be thinking about that, and we'll be really excited to be reading the Odyssey. But I think actually now maybe can we get to another question that's been on the discussion board? So some members of our community were wondering about the difference between poetry and song, and so this really gets us prepared for the Odyssey too, right? That's why I'm thinking about this question right now. So what's the difference between poetry and song in this culture?
You should do this.
You want me to take a
Yes.
shot at it first?
Yes.
Well, you'll hear me saying over and over and over again, ancient Greek song culture. And I like to use the word song because in English, words like sing, singing, song have performance built into them. The idea of performance is in them. When you sing something, you perform a song. And in other languages, you don't have that, or not as clearly. And the teacher that Lenny and I had for studying oral traditions, Albert Lord, when he wrote his book, The Singer of Tales, he had that in mind when he thought of that title, The Singer of Tales. Because a singer of tales is somebody who performs the tales. So it's not just composing, it's composing and performing.
Right.
For me, song is a very special word. And then, if you like, poetry is kind of a subcategory in our culture where we depend on the written word.
Yes. When we think of a poem or poetry, you think of a book.
Yeah, we think of a book, we think of something that's written down, we think of the composer as a writer, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But when we say song, we have to go into a different mode of thinking where the technology of writing has nothing to do with either the composition or the performance of the medium.
Yeah.
And that's what Homeric Iliad is, that's what Homeric Odyssey is.
Yeah. So when we come to the Odyssey, you're going to see the singers in action.
Oh yeah.
But you already have in the Iliad, right?
Yeah, less so,
Less so,
but it's there. It's there.
Yeah.
And so that's why, if you like, poetry is a specialized word, and it's bound to our culture, our way of looking at verbal arts. Song is something that covers a whole multitude of different forms of verbal art, and that's why I use the term ancient Greek song culture, because I can say more by saying song instead of poetry.
What are you thinking, Lenny? Do you have anything to add to that?
Thinking also about music in Greek, because that's a different concept too.
Yeah.
And when we think of song, we think of words and music, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
For us, music is the melodic line or the rhythm line of something produced by an instrument. But for Greeks, music is the two things together, right? It's the movement even too. It's dancing, right? Song.
That's important.
But a song can, the way it's portrayed in the Odyssey is with a person with an instrument. But there were also performances of epic by singers who did not have an instrument.
That's right. And so we can call it recitative.
Yes.
And certainly the Homeric Iliad and Odyssey were, in the historical period, not sung the way we think of singing. It was more like reduced melody, and one technical term would be recitative.
Yes,
or
exactly.
recitative.
So something in between speaking and singing.
And certainly something that no longer required a musical instrument.
Yes.
So that's what happens in the historical period.
We're trying to envision the reality. It's a complex reality, and in all ways different from what we're used to.
Yeah.
So, we've already talked about sort of Milman Parry, and we've talked about the ways that we're going to already start thinking about this poetry as a system, right? And reading it as a system. And now we are talking about these issues of performance and song. And so I'd like to turn to another question that we've had in the discussion board. We've had some communication between the community and between the board of readers, in particular you, Lenny, talking about the self-assessments, actually. And one of the issues that has come up, well, I guess really it's a question, is how do we make a distinction between reading out of the text appropriately within that system, let's say, and interpretation, right? So we had a question where people were wondering about, well, if I'm reading very literally, if I'm not reading out of the text, does that mean I could only read very literally, like word by word? Can you talk a little bit about that, because I think that's important.
Sure. I think. Well, can we make a little aside to link together the two topics that you're talking about? That is the fact that we're talking about a song culture, and also that we're talking about a system, a poetic system.
Exactly, yeah.
Because the way in which you can have a song culture that produces songs like the Iliad and the Odyssey is that when the performer performs, he's not just making stuff up. Okay, he has a whole system that he's learned by lots and lots of practice and lots of experience. And so also the audience has learned it over and over again. So that there's a backlog and a resonance to everything that the performer says, and that's also in the minds of his audience as well. So if you have a system like that, where your audience is acculturated to what you're doing and you also know what they know, okay, you can say a lot of things without having to say them, okay, if you want.
Yes.
What's on the surface of the text is only the surface, okay? So one of the things that our teacher Albert Lloyd said is that every element of a traditional song has depth, okay? And so in order to be able to read this poetry successfully, you can't just read off the surface.
Sorry.
And read it again and get a sense of how the system works and learn what the resonance of the word. Every word has a context, has a resonant set of things that are associated with it that the individual performer and his audience were sensitive to, and that the poet can just point at without even saying.
Yes.
And you have a key word and a whole set of ideas and associations and sensations can come to mind for the audience.
And you can see, Claudia, from the way Lenny just described this experience, that in a strange way, sometimes if you're a first-timer and you're reading something and you don't get it, you say, well, what if I slow down? Will I get it? And you may not get it even then because you haven't yet had enough experience. And so my heart goes out to people who feel frustrated. Am I behind? Because, well, yes, we're all behind compared to the audience, the appreciative audience of the medium for expressing these very important values. There are some people who grew up with it, and we have to try to rebuild it from scratch. I love the way you said rebuild it. And that's why I don't discourage slow reading, because sometimes your only recourse is, oh, I feel like giving up. Well, let me read faster and faster just to see where it's going, and am I getting a better comfort level? That's sometimes the way you pick up the rudiments of the system. And eventually, when you're really engaged with something, then you can allow yourself to slow down and really think about what happened before and what happened before that, and then the system starts rebuilding itself. I like the way Lenny said it. It's a rebuilding for us.
But I think then there's this problem about the notions that are out there about reading carefully, which means reading every word. So, for example, the question that came up on the bulletin board was, well, Achilles doesn't say anything about this, for example.
Yeah.
And so we are, on the one hand, we're telling people you have to really pay attention to what's being said, because that's where the content lies. But that's only a part of the puzzle. In other words, you have to have there's the missing part. And when we talk about interpretation, we're not talking about making stuff up about the way it feels to you. We're not talking about this is a free-for-all, and you can just say whatever comes to mind to you in your own experience of the poetry. We're talking about trying to get at, in terms of interpretation, we're trying to get you to and we're trying to articulate ourselves what our understanding is of the system. So if you only read the surface of the text, you only have a portion of what's there. And it takes time and experience to develop enough understanding of what's behind the words in the text, so to speak, to be able to interpret in a way that you can justify in terms of the system, or that seems reasonable to justify in terms of the system, right? Mm-hmm. So anything goes. You just make stuff up. Okay, it's about you have to try and get a grasp on the stuff that's missing, right?
That's beautiful.
And when Lenny talked about depth, the reason there's depth is there's a system, and the system is a language, and language has depth.
Yes. If you try to understand a text from a dictionary with one-word meanings, you'll have a really hard time.
Yes.
Right.
So the entry is hard. Yes. It is challenging, but the rewards are just so great, and they start coming at you left and right.
Yeah, and I think we are seeing that in the community. I mean, people are really enjoying the reading. They're enjoying both the source text and H24H. So I think we're seeing a lot of engagement, and not as much actually discouragement. And I think part of that is just that there's so much community support around people if they have a question. We have a lot of support within the discussion board, as you know, Lenny, from the Board of Readers, from yourself, from Keith, from Tom, and especially from Joel Christensen, who's been particularly active. So I think we have a lot to offer.
Right from you. But you know,
and me.
I love to think of the part where most people jump ship, and that's, no pun intended, the Catalogue of Ships at the end of Rhapsody 2. And because to us, all these names and where they come from mean nothing. And even for experts in classics, they often mean nothing or very little. Right. But if you can try to imagine people listening to this in the late 8th and early 7th century BCE, that's one big moment. Or how about the 6th and the 5th centuries BCE, that's another great moment. Well, people those days were so invested that they could think of where they are situated in terms of those heroes back then. What social group is descended from which of the people who went to Troy to fight for the honor of Menelaus and Agamemnon? They really knew their family trees, their, how shall I say it, their constructed family trees. And it meant everything to them because that had to do with their identity. But for us, well, I say to people, just go through it very fast, right? Because there's so little that we can appreciate. Yeah. So that's definitely a fast reading zone for the first time.
It's another very simple example of how the elements have depth, right?
Yeah.
This audience, right? That's missing for us, right?
Yeah. And it's just not one of those things where you can ever feel, and even Lenny and I don't feel that way, I'm sure, if we've mastered the whole thing. This thing has depth that goes back 2,000 years sometimes.
Okay. So, Allie, do you remember the first time you read the Iliad or the Odyssey? How was it for you?
The first time I was supposed to read the Odyssey was I was supposed to read it in high school, and our and shame on her for doing this, but my high school English teacher said, "Oh, you guys, we're just going to watch the movie. We're not going to read it." and so we watched the 1950.
Oh, the one with Kirk Douglas.
Kirk Douglas.
And Tony Quinn as Amphipolis.
Yeah.
And Sid Charisse or something like that was Helen.
So that's my first experience with the Odyssey.
That's so interesting.
But I read it as part of an introductory freshman course at Rhodes called Search. And my professor was actually David Sick, whom I think you met. And it was just one of the most wonderful things I ever read. You know, just perfect way to start college, I think.
Yeah. How beautiful. Okay, so one last question, and I just want to apologize. We are experiencing a little bit of I think some sound difficulties. There's a little bit of a whirring sound, so if people hear that in the recording, I hope they just join again next time, because I think we're just experiencing some unusual technical difficulties today. So one last question, and in particular, Lenny, I think this is really for you on many levels. We've had questions about basically, well, isn't Achilles just a brat? Right? Basically, what's up with Achilles? and how could we ever like him? And I know, Greg, you're such a great advocate for Achilles. And so, but I know that you...
Listen, I understand that you don't like him, but please try to like him.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. So I know, Lenny, you spent a lot of time thinking about the anger that Achilles has. And so I think that has a lot to do with his actions and reactions in the beginning of the Iliad that might help people maybe connect with him a little bit more.
I think that's a really important thing. If you think about this is a really basic difference, a really basic feature of our culture. What do we think about people who display anger in a public way, okay? In front of large groups of people? I think of people like Howard Dean, who lost his job as he lost his school once. Okay, it's something that's really unacceptable in our society, and it has to do with our Anglo-Saxon roots and stuff like that. We're not a Mediterranean culture, at least in the Northeast, and people are trying to hide their feelings, whether they succeed or not. And it's looked down upon. We discourage our children from being publicly angry.
Yes.
We have negative feelings about all these things.
And that's what we hear about Achilles, right? It's like he's infantile. He's a child. He's a brat.
About somebody else's kid when they get angry in the supermarket, right? That they don't know they're not good parents, and the kid has been spoiled, right? So I think it's sort of a built-in knee-jerk response that our culture teaches us, people who are publicly angry, and we're offended by it, and we think that a person who does that is not properly acculturated. Okay, whereas there's no such thing that comes built in with that concept in the Iliad, right? What we're missing is what are the built-in associations of anger in the Homeric context, and that's the thing that we need to reconstruct if we want to understand it. I think that's one big part of it. Another part of it is that when we read any text with characters, that we want to engage with them, and we like characters who are, it's like the notion, I'd like to have a beer with him. Okay, fun to have a beer with Achilles. Okay, it's not that kind of a medium.
I don't think he'd want to have a beer with us.
He wouldn't either. Okay.
In other words, so to speak, he's not the kind.
Yes, exactly. He's not Mr. Nice Guy. Okay. He's not Mr. Hail Well Man. Okay. And I think that too is something that I think in general that's an important starting point, because heroes are not in general Mr. Nice Guy. Right.
So is that it, Greg? Part of it is that we need to come to terms with this negative side of the hero?
But the part about sitting it out isn't even all that negative.
Yes.
Right. No, I agree. Yeah, we actually really didn't get to the punchline there.
I take your point. There are lots of negative things about Achilles, especially his brutality when he starts reacting to the death of his nearest and dearest. There's just no stopping him, and you ask yourself, is there any level of bestiality that he will not descend to? So yes, he has questionable moments. But the part about sitting it out, you can make the argument that he is relatively controlled, because if it weren't for Athena, who yanks him by his long hair from behind, and I'd love to be able to visualize that cinematically, and his head jerks back, and he hears the voice is, okay, you go into an anger mode that is mēnis, which, as Lenny has shown in his book, means something like cosmic sanction, instead of another kind of anger mode, which is Filos, which would be blowing up and just killing Agamemnon right then and there. And so he doesn't do that. He doesn't commit what would be a socially not sanctioned act of murder. Although you could say he's justified.
Yes.
You could argue he's justified. Yeah. He doesn't do that. He just sits it out instead. And while he's sitting it out, the enemy manages to do all sorts of real damage to the Achaeans. And the way that damage is described is as if Zeus himself were striking the Achaeans with his thunderbolt. That's what the fire of Hector is like when the fire of Hector threatens the ships of the Achaeans as they're parked there like sitting ducks on the shores of the Hellespont.
And that in itself is a part of the anger that theme of Mēnis. One of his most normal expressions in terms of the thunderbolt and the fire associated with it.
Except that when Achilles does it, we see the effects of Mēnis in the simile world.
Yes.
Hector's fire is like the thunderbolt of Zeus. And Hector's fire wouldn't be successful if Achilles weren't sitting it out. So Achilles' cosmic anger translates into this very interesting, active show of anger by Zeus, but that's in the world of comparison.
Yeah. And the same thing happens when there are things that happen, but I think...
Lenny, can you speak up just a little bit just because of that whirring noise we're having?
Oh, okay. Now I've lost my train of thought. Hold on.
I'm so sorry.
It's the worrying. Yeah, it's the worrying.
The cicadas.
Cool it off the middle.
We're cooling off the computer.
Yes, I mean, here's what I wanted to say.
Yeah,
is that when he is, this is another case where we have a kind of knee-jerk terminological reaction that he's sulking in his tent, right? Yeah. Which is what people say. I
think it's so superficial.
It's just like the spoiled brat kind of language. Okay, so the person who's not participating is just withdrawing to be a spoiled child.
As a bad sport.
Yes, exactly, as a bad sport. But instead, what he's doing is not. He's subtracted himself from the equation. Right? He's not doing anything negative or positive. He's just become inactive. Okay. So what it makes clear also, aside from enabling this kind of cosmic difficulty, a level on a cosmic level, because Achilles has cosmic connections via his mother. Okay, but and the anger is manifested on a higher level than himself, and also in terms of these metaphors that are used for the human. But also, what it shows is what his value is to the group, right? If one person makes the war effort begin to subside and be inferior, it tells us how important he is as a fighter to the communal group, right? And I think that's an important issue as well.
That's beautiful. Like, can I ask a follow-up question in terms of Achilles sort of subtracting himself? Because I know you've thought a bit about the way that Mēnis and solidarity sort of work together. Can you just say a few words about that?
Yeah, I think that those are the poles. Okay, that I give you another example, a very famous example of Mēnis. Here it involves a goddess, and that's Demeter. And in the epic tradition, that's in the poetic tradition represented by the Homeric hymns, when Demeter's daughter Persephone is stolen by the god of the underworld, she goes into a temple, and there are a bunch of things that happen. But one of the things that she does is she's said to have this Mēnis, the same thing that Achilles does, and she goes into a temple and stays there. And what happens is, because she's a goddess of fertility and plant growth, is all the plants start withering and people don't have any food. Okay, so it's again this way in which an absence proves the importance of someone's presence, right? So I think. Right. What was your initial question?
Right. So, it's so beautiful because what it does is Mēnis is actually important in terms of maintaining sort of group cohesion, right?
Yes. So there you see the isolation of the figure with Mēnis signals their importance, But the end of mēnis is the return of the goddess, in this case, or the return of Achilles to the group. So when Patroclus gets dressed up as Achilles, and he goes out to fight in his place, and the Trojans see him there, what the text tells us is that they thought it was that Achilles had rejected, had thrown away, it's a violent term, his mēnis, and chosen friendship. Okay?
Yeah.
In other words, those are the opposing poles of his life. Okay?
Right.
So either he's part of the social group and has pilates, so friendship, or he's hostile to the social group and has mēnis. Okay? So you can see that the withdrawal and the isolation that are part of his that part of it is a part of the theme of mēnis as well. Okay, it's not the God suffering in his tent. In short. Okay.
That's so beautiful. Greg, do you have any last words as we're thinking about that in our movement into the next few weeks of our project?
I think that Lenny has really nailed that, especially coming from him, where he writes a whole book about one word in the Iliad, which is the first word. And in a sense, if you interpret that word deeply enough, you get a sense of the whole plot. And that's what you just heard from Lenny. And that's a hard act to follow. So I think I'll stop right there.
Okay, that's great. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I look forward to doing this again, probably in 2 weeks. And we will respond again to the questions that people have in the discussion board, to the questions that are coming up, the concerns, the really themes that people seem to be struggling with or enjoying. So thank you so much, Allie. We so appreciate your being here and joining our conversation. We hope you'll all join us.
But thank you, Claudia, for the great questions.
They're very incisive. I think the people out there will really appreciate your questions.
Well, these are community questions. They're not my questions, actually.
You articulated them so well for the community.
Well, thank you so much. All right, more soon from everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.